Zoids has quite a few anime series. Some you may remember fondly from your childhood, and others you might not recognize at all. So I'm going to take you through a mostly headcanon journey through the Zoids timeline and help you piece together every bit of this anime. Because reminiscing on old anime and discussing theories on how each series interconnects is just fun. And yes, I did make a video just like this 4 years ago now, and for some reason there are still people going to that video and watching it. And quite frankly, it's embarrassing. I had no script, so I was just rambling. I was recording audio off these exact Apple earphones, and I used so much copyrighted content in that video, my whole channel almost got terminated. So you could call this a remaster of my first video and a 4-year anniversary to when I first started posting on this channel. Jesus Christ, it's been a while, hey? Of course, to preface, each Zoids series is standalone and you do not have to watch one to enjoy another. And a majority of them don't actually canonically link in any way, shape or form. But there are some actual links and a shit ton of anecdotal evidence to play around with. So let's not waste any more time and get right into where it all began, with Zoids Chaotic Century. Based on a faraway planet in the Milky Way galaxy known as Planet Z, Zoids Chaotic Century follows the story of our young protagonist Van Flyeye, a kid from a rural town known as the Wind Colony who quickly gets in over his head, finding a wild organoid, basically a mini Zoid that can fuse with and amp the powers of bigger Zoids, in a company with a strange young girl named Fiona, who was locked in or stored in a capsule and has amnesia. All Fiona can remember is her name and something called the Zoid Eve. So our gracious hero Van decides he'll help her find this Zoid Eve and hopefully get her memory back in the process, which is the perfect opportunity for him to set out, leave his village and explore the world like he has always wanted to do. And thanks to his new organoid buddy that he's named Zeke, he now also has a shield-like Zoid to traverse the world in. Have I lost you yet? No? Good. This world we're about to venture into isn't exactly a safe one though, as there's currently a tension-filled ceasefire going on between the Gylos Empire and the Hellenic Republic, who were at war not even a couple of years prior. So that means a lot of people are out for themselves and there are a lot of skirmishes happening on the outskirts of each of these factions' territories, as each of these factions are trying to get the upper hand and force the other to spark the flame of war once again, which of course Van will inevitably get caught up in. And throughout the series we get to see the good and bad of each side, as well as see Van work with both the Republic and the Empire. Not usually of his own will though. But before any of that, we get to meet our accompanying cast. We've got Irvine, who's introduced as a self-absorbed mercenary who tries to steal Zeke from Van. He later comes around and travels with our gang thanks to another member, Moonbay, who's an arms dealer profiting off the ceasefire from both sides and has some sort of a past with Irvine. Now we've got Mum, Dad, and the 2 kids, our mini nuclear family, to travel across Z and experience the nuance of both sides of this war with, whilst also trying to find the Zoid Eve to help Fiona, of course, we can't forget that part. But what's a good anime without a rival? And for Chaotic Century, we have Raven. He's introduced relatively early on as the polar opposite to Van. Working for the Imperial Army, they tend to butt heads quite a few times throughout the series. Van hates the way that Raven just has a complete disregard for a Zoid's life. After all, Zoids are actually living mechanical beings. And Raven, on the other hand, hates how much Van even cares at all, because he has a deep-rooted hatred for Zoids and his goal is to just kill them all. Raven's also got a wacky little Zoid friend organoid named Shadow, in case the 2 of them being polar opposites wasn't obvious enough. So in essence, Chaotic Century is mainly just an adventure story, with plenty of awesome Zoids battles and drama that culminates with our big bad guy in the background, Frozen, taking control of the Empire from a little guy named Prince Rudolph. then going out of his way to create a clone of the seemingly all-powerful Death Soarer, all for our hero Van Flyheight to inevitably stop him at the end in his flashy new Blade Liger. That also took out Raven in his flashy new Genosaur like an episode prior. Bro does not get to rest. Sure, there's far more to the original Chaotic Century than that, and there's actually some really great storytelling and character development in this 34 episode glorified toy advertisement that I hold very dearly to my heart, but it is time to move on to Guardian Force. That's right, Chaotic Century continues with an undisclosed, but for the sake of argument, say 2-year time skip into Guardian Force. This is a direct continuation, so there is no mental gymnastics needed to connect these two. And plus, the first 2 episodes of Guardian Force are even constrained to Volume 9 of the Chaotic Century DVD set, so there's that too. After Van took out Prozin and became the hero of Planet Z, the Empire and Republic joined forces to create the Guardian Force, a task force with the sole purpose of maintaining the peace. Our old gang surprisingly all went their separate ways at the end of Chaotic Century. That's right, including Fiona, our girl with amnesia. She goes off to keep looking for the Zoid Eve on her own, while Van instead just enlists in the military and trains under Colonel Kruger. Sure, he could have continued to help her like he said he would in the original, but then we wouldn't get a cool, heartfelt reunion of the two when they meet up in Guardian Force after the time skip. Eventually, we meet back up with Irvine, who kind of went back to his mercenary roots, before unofficially joining the Guardian Force after his command wolf was destroyed by the Genobreaker and had its soul transplanted into the Lightning Sykes. It sounds kind of weird when I say it like that, but it's not that crazy. It basically just made a backup of its memory onto an external drive and transplanted it into another machine. Still odd? Well, anyway, even though the war's over, there are still a lot of powerful people in the shadows causing mayhem, whether that be arms dealers, assassins, or even Zoid hunters. So that's the kind of thing our boy Van now goes out and tries to stop. But it's not just senseless filler. All of this is still pushing a narrative in the background. Everything centers around a red-headed man we meet in the first episode, Hiltz. Nobody knows it yet, but he's the one in the background pulling the strings, mainly trying to mess with the Guardian Force and train his organoid ambient, pushing it to its limits, striving for an end goal of ruling the planet. Because, well, of course he is. But there are many steps before that, one of which involves Raven coming back out of the woodworks and Hiltz giving a guy like that a Genosaur again. However, this one is ripe and ready to evolve into a Genobreaker. He's also in cahoots with a girl named Reese, who is an ancient Zoidian that has an ability to control minds. She ends up becoming far more important to Raven in his story than Hiltz anyhow though. But ancient Zoidians, that's a whole other lore aspect I haven't even touched on yet. Basically, to sum it up, they're all people from a long-lost civilization on Planet Z that were once near completely wiped out by their own creation, the Death Soarer, which is that thing that Prozin cloned at the end of the first series. Fiona is also an ancient Zoidian, which goes to explain a lot of the weird shenanigans that happened in Chaotic Century, like her fusing with Zeke in the Liger, letting it evolve, as well as her repairing the Blade Liger, and more than likely explains why Van found her in a pod. She was probably in cryosleep for a very long time. So, of course, as Zoids tradition, we get a lot of battles here and there, and eventually we're reintroduced to another main character, Moonbay, as well as a new accompanying character, Thomas. All of these guys end up facing Raven in his Genobreaker as their biggest obstacle. That is, up until Hiltz finally reveals his hand and uncovers the Death Stinger, which is the Zoid he had Ambient create with all that scheming he's done throughout the story so far. Now, Hiltz is the center of the tension and our big bad, and of course, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so literally the entire world, including Raven and Reese, gang up on Hiltz. However, none of them can stop him because the Death Stinger is crazily overpowered. Eventually, the Guardian Force do manage to temporarily stop him with the Ultrasaurus and a custom-made gravity cannon, but like I said, that was only a temporary solution. Fiona then uncovers the infamous Zoid Eve, which is actually just a big city that lies underneath a crazy place we went to all the way back in episode 9. Hiltz then fuses himself and Ambient into the Death Stinger's Zoid core and fuses that with a brainwashed Prozin who we thought died, who actually morphed into the Death Soarer's original Zoid core to revive the original Death Soarer. Yeah, okay, it's dumb. I know it, you know it, we all know it. But who cares? This series really always did have that flicker of magical bullshit anyway. And plus, this gives us an awesome final boss fight where our series-long rivals Van and Raven finally get to team up against one common enemy. And we get our heartfelt ending where everyone celebrates and lives happily ever after. You love to see it. Now, it's time to take a leap into the new century. Capitalism has truly taken over. Zoids are now a commodity and fight for sport. You will definitely be catching me at the ZTAB, smashing a schnitty and knocking down a few cold ones for my boy Leon while watching the Liger Zero vs Elephander showdown. As you can imagine, Zoids' new century takes place in a completely new century from Chaotic Century. The exact time jump is unknown, but we can speculate it's been at least 100 years, because, you know, that would officially bring us into a new century. We are still kicking on Planet Z, and this is the only officially-ish Link to Zoids series we've got, and there are many ways to prove that, which we'll get into very shortly. Zoids New Century, or New Century Zero as it was called in some places outside of Australia, follows a story of a young kid named BitCloud. And don't get me started on the ages, I know, everyone in this series looks like they're like in their 20s, but no, it's anime. He's like 16, and a pretty handy 16-year-old at that. I don't know what kind of mechanics courses they're teaching out there, but He was once a junk dealer turned registered Zoid pilot. After getting caught sneaking into the Blitz team's home base trying to steal parts, instead stealing their Liger Zero, but returning it the next day. The fact he could even pilot the Liger Zero, something nobody else in the Blitz team could manage to do, led him to be recruited by the team's leader and manager, Dr. Tauros, and he became a part of the team from that point forward. They really just all blindsided him, honestly. The Blitz team also consists of 3 other pilots. We've got Lena Tauros, Dr. Tauros' daughter, who pilots a D-Bison at the start and later transitions into a gun sniper with full artillery. We've also got Brad, a mercenary who starts off in a Command Wolf and later steals a Shadow Fox. And finally, we've got Jamie, who doesn't fight all that much, but starts off in a Terrace and finishes the series in a Reynos. There's also the guy that Bit quickly replaces, Leon, who piloted a Shield Liger and later comes back as Bit's main rival in a red Blade Liger. The premise of this story is pretty simple, because really, it's just a 26 episode tournament arc. The Blitz team get into progressively tougher battles up until the final Royal Cup, which is literally just a battle royale for Zoids. It is by far the easiest Zoids entry to get into and honestly the most fun. I really couldn't blame anyone for picking this entry as their favorite. It's got everything. It's got great battles every single episode, likable characters, and a bit of silly slapstick humor here and there. What's not to love? Of course, we've also got to have an antagonist group, and in New Century's case, that is the Backdraft group, an underground criminal syndicate that organizes high-stakes, unsanctioned battles for their rich, sadistic, gambling viewers. Kind of like those anonymous spectators in Squid Game. That's the vibe they give off. So cool, basic story, Zoids battle, progress through ranks, easy to understand. How does it link back to Chaotic Century though? There's a bunch of things we can point to, starting with some of the more obvious picks. The final battle in the final episode between Bit and Vega, Liger Zero vs Berserk Fury, takes place on an old wreck of an Ultrasaurus that is fitted with a gravity cannon. That model with the gravity cannon is a 1-of-1 created by Dr. D in Chaotic Century. We've also got the salvaged Death Stinger tail used in episode 24 by the Backdraft group to shoot down a Judge satellite. The Death Stinger not being a naturally occurring Zoid, it's a custom one created by Pilts that can only have come from one place. There are also really small details like the Death Sora and Geno Breaker model kits we see Dr. Tauros building and playing around with. In particular, a red Geno Breaker is technically, at least in the anime's case, exclusive to Raven, as the reasoning for it even being red in the first place was due to Hilt's or Ambient's tampering with his Genosaurus Zoid core, because originally it should have been black, or purple I suppose, that dark shade, although Reese in the anime says black. The chances of a naturally occurring red Geno Breaker, or really any Geno Breaker to base a model kit off in this universe for that matter is practically nil. So the kit Dr. Taurus has to be based off Raven's Genobreaker from way back when. You could see this as like the equivalent of how if you go into a hobby store, you will see a bunch of model kits of planes and boats from like World War II, except, you know, this is going to be Dr. Taurus walking into a store seeing the pilots of old from thousands of years ago and the old Zoids that won the war or something like that. I don't know. You can just picture in your head this old dude like walking into a hobby kit and picking it up saying, wow, this is the Raven version. Like he wanted that anime exclusive. He wanted that war exclusive, that one of one that fought in the war. Well, he wanted that replica, that 172 scale that beat the Death Soarer with Van. Yeah, he's just like us for real, honestly. Now, sure, he could have painted that kit, but A, it's less fun if we consider that. And B, are we really going to get into the lore of whether Dr. Taurus, the guy that couldn't glue a leg back on a model kit, actually paints his model kits? I mean, we are deep enough into this already, but no, I'm going to draw a line here. There's also an excerpt from a 2001 Animedia magazine that states the sanctioned battles of Zoids New Century take place 1,000 years after the war between the Republic and the Empire ended. Now, this isn't official word from the creators of the anime or anything, but hey, at least it's something. If you wanted some more like real headcanon theories on how these two anime connect and what actually happened in the years between Chaotic Century and New Century, I've made a video on it and you can check that out right here. So now that you've got the rundown of the short but sweet action-packed New Century, we're going to take a nosedive even further into the future with Zoids Fuzors. And here's where things go way off the plot. Zoids Fuzors has a similar structure to its predecessor, except Zoids have just been commodified even further and their battles just take place in a sad, blank, grey arena. Probably because the production team just didn't have the budget for some hectic, varying battle arenas like they did in Beyblade back then. Don't get me wrong, the series does have a lot of fights outside of these strict arena walls, but seeing it is still really jarring every time it happens. In Fuzors, we follow our protagonist RD, who, of course, pilots a Liger Zero. It worked for New Century and it is the poster Zoid for this series more or less, so what else are we going to give the guy? He works for a courier company cross Zoids battle team named Mark Storm, which just does not have the charm something like the Blitz team did. Like, come on, look at these bozos. Nobody remembers you. Nobody knows your names. I would apologize to all the Fuzors fans out there, but to be honest, I think I can handle the 3 dislikes this video will get from them. And hey, all 3 of you should be grateful anybody even remembers Fuzors at all. Needless to say, because our protagonist has full-time employment as an Amazon delivery driver, we get a whole bunch of odd job filler episodes that consist of things like escort missions and courier jobs spread throughout the whole series, placed in amongst the Zoid battles we actually want to see, although want to see is pretty debatable. And of every series that Zoids has under its umbrella, Fuzors just stands out as having the absolute worst animation and art direction out of them all. They just decided to go balls to the wall with 3D and didn't know how to utilize it properly. Because New Century and Chaotic Century before it both featured 3D models blended in with a lot of other 2D animation elements. And it blended so well that you could barely even notice it. But this? Fuzors? This ain't it, Chief. Anywho, I'm not here to rant about Fuzors, I'm here to explain. So to really summarize the plot, we get lots of Zoid battles, lots of mysterious activity in the background, lots of heroics, and of course just tedious odd jobs because RD's got to make that bread, a couple of badass new Zoids that we just never see again, some Zoids that can, well, fuse now because that's a whole thing exclusive to this series, and because of that, the Zero can now fly. And at the end of it all, the mysterious big bad guy Alpha Richter, who's been scheming in the background the entire series, whips out his Ultrasaurus from Wish.com in an attempt to take over the whole city, and RD, alongside his series-long rival Blake in his Gyricke Fury, which is one of the few Zoids in this series that actually is seriously badass, work together and put an end to this Alpha Richter guy's plans once and for all. If you genuinely want a more in-depth breakdown on fuses and everything that happens in it, I have made a whole video on that already. I'll link up here and in the description below. Although I do have to warn you, I sound pretty damn monotone and just kind of boring in those old videos. But if you can put up with that, go for it. Knock yourself out, have fun. So with all that being said, how do fuses and New Century actually connect? Well, they don't. And it's pretty clear why. I mean, Zoids like the Genosaur and the Blade Liger are made to be nearly a complete joke in this series. They're just commonplace at this point and not nearly the absolute mass monsters they were in their previous series. That's mainly because Fuses is much more closely based off the Zoids battle story and its interpretation of Zoids, instead of Zebek's world of Chaotic Century and New Century, which is loosely based off Michio Uyama's manga series under the same name. Like this one right here, if you weren't aware, Chaotic Century is loosely based off this. This manga never actually was complete, and this is where Zebek took inspiration from. I also made a whole video on this if you're interested. It is a pretty great and underappreciated manga, so I would recommend it, but beware, unfortunately it is unfinished and I doubt it ever will be finished. So yes, canonically they definitely are completely separate, there's no doubting that. But for the sake of argument and the fun of this video, let's just try and force these puzzle pieces together. For us to get to a point where Zoids battles are so contained they can actually take place in an arena in a city, and Zoids like the Genosaur and Blade Liger are not considered as powerful as they once were, so much so that you would feel comfortable to let them loose in an arena in a largely populated city, we've probably got to jump at least another century. Technology advances pretty exponentially, so we probably won't have to make as big of a jump as we did from Chaotic to New Century. So to make up a cohesive timeline, let's just say there's approximately 200 years between Chaotic Century and New Century, and then we'll put 100 more years between New Century and Fuses. Within that time, engineers are going to have to figure out a way to essentially neuter new generations of Zoids, because don't forget, we're not working with the same ones we did back then. These are living machines that will eventually die off and, new ones will form. So in essence, these new Zoids would be slowly domesticated, kind of like wolves to dogs. But because they are still technically machines and can be engineered, it would not take anywhere near as long to domesticate something like that. And plus, the freaks of nature created in a lab like the Genosaur would more than likely be a lot easier and quicker to engineer and tone down. So weapons like their charged particle beam would just be engineered to be far less powerful than they originally were. And the creation of new Zoids would more than likely be monitored by some sort of government body so they don't get too powerful again. Because the last thing we'd want is more of these monumentally overpowered death machines we had in the past running rampage through a city, because that's where the arenas are, of course. Great idea, right? Because of all these government restrictions that would be in place, it would more than likely create a black market of sorts for more true to nature Zoids, with less of these modern restrictions, and these Zoids would be ones like the Energy Liger and the Gyricke Fury. Then we've got the advancements in Fusor technology quickly bridging that gap once again, and before you know it, Zoids become as powerful and destructive as they once were by combining with each other. This would inevitably generate a whole new arms race with cataclysmic consequences that lead us right into our next entry, Zoids Genesis. Zoids Genesis is set in, let's say, more of a feudal Japan-esque time period. Like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, we got way too close to the present and had to jump back in time. Or did we? Looks can be deceiving, and I wouldn't have chucked Genesis in at this point in the video if we truly went back in time, or would I? Zoids Genesis follows the story of Ruji Famelon, a kid from a seaside village that gets wrapped up in Digald's colonization after it eventually spreads to the outer reaches of the continent, which is of course where his little hometown is situated. After awakening the Murasame Liger, him and his townspeople raised from the depths of the ocean, he defends his town from the onslaught of Digald, but unfortunately, his town's generator becomes collateral damage. Generators are spread all across the world and essentially bring life to their general vicinity, kind of like how the time keys worked in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. So, blaming himself for its destruction, our protagonist sets off on a journey alongside a couple of new people he's just met, Rakan and Raimi, who also feel partially responsible for what happened, to go out and find a mechanic that can fix the generator. But don't forget, we're back in old times now, so it won't be as simple as making a couple of calls and trying to figure out who can actually do this. We've only got paper maps, so we're gonna have to travel and just go out and talk to people, which is certainly not an easy feat when Digald's takeover is growing exponentially. While Zoids themselves obviously exist, they're clearly a remnant technology from a long past that no one truly understands. But they have been discovered all around the continent, reactivated and put to use where possible. So Ruji gets to go on his journey, making a bunch of friends along the way, seeing how big and vast the world is, and how bad things have actually gotten outside of the bubble of his village. All of this culminates with his realization that even if he does manage to find someone who can repair his village's generator, it's not gonna matter while Digald's still around, because they just end up returning, destroying it again, or doing something even worse. This leads him to spark a rebellion led by Rakan. But the army they've raised isn't enough. They need specialized weapons to actually put a dent in and destroy Digald's Biozoids. And without special weaponry like that, they aren't gonna get anywhere. And Digald's growth and expansion is happening at an alarming rate, so they are going to need help quick, which is where the people of the sky come into play and our uncanonical link to Fuzors is revealed. Essentially, a couple thousand years ago, a mass war took place and brought about something called the Great Change, or God's Fury. At the head of this war were two gill dragons, and the result of it was an uninhabitable planet. So the remainder of civilization at the time made a temporary solution, a city that can suspend itself in the sky and maintain a limited population. That is until at least they're fixed, the generators sprouted and made the land below habitable again. But these generators took 50 years a pop to complete, and over time the people of the sky got complacent. And in the end they didn't even want to return back to the land to rebuild, so they just didn't. Everyone else who wasn't clued in on what was happening here was left on the land to just fend for themselves. And within just a couple of generations, the futuristic past would soon just be forgotten about, outside of some remnant technology like the Zoids that people would discover. So to put our timeline into perspective once again, let's say Chaotic Century takes place in the year 2000, which would theoretically place New Century around 2200, and then Fuzors somewhere around 2300. Then let's say from the end of Fuzors we get a crazy arms race that leads to an all-out war coming to a head in the year 2400. As we can see, there is a bit of a technological leap between the end of Fuzors and the weird floating coffee pod things we see in Genesis. At the head of this battle, God's Fury takes place. And as quoted in episode 45 of Genesis, a couple of thousand years then pass. So for argument's sake, we'll be sitting in the year 4400 for the story of Genesis. This also fits in with the manga continuation of the timeline, as we get to see a short snippet where Ruji is sitting at a campfire with his friends talking about an old legend of a boy and his liger saving the world from something. And then when he goes to bed, he magically transports back in time to meet Van and Liger Zero Caesar the King. So in that continuity, it is confirmed to be linked, and it's confirmed that the events of Chaotic Century take place in the far past and Genesis in the far future. So it all kind of lines up and supports this theory too, which is pretty cool. I could go on about Genesis for ages. It is a great entry into this series, but I've already done it. so feel free to check out that video if you're interested. Now we've come to an interesting point, an unknown territory for this channel, Zoids Wild. I've never talked about the Zoids Wild series before, nor do I actually ever really plan on making dedicated videos on it. Because if I'm honest, I just don't really find it all that interesting. But I'm gonna suck it up just for you and talk about it a little bit in this video. Now I'd have to do some absolutely insane mental gymnastics in order to link the worlds of Zoids Wild and Wild Zero to the original uncanonical timeline we just made. So I'm not going to do that. And to be blunt with you, I don't know enough about either series to pull that thread and make that link because I haven't actually finished Wild or Wild Zero, and I don't think I honestly ever will. The whole premise of both of these series never really intrigued me. I mean, yeah, Wild Zero a little bit more than Wild, but even then I could never get into it. And I think the main reason for that is because these Zoids just felt too alive. While Zoids have always been living machines, in the early series they always just felt more like machines. Rarely would a personality shine through, and they were decked out with so much armor and weaponry, and all around just looked less naked, or wild, I suppose. I feel like the early series really captured that mechanical side and found the perfect balance between Zoids being living machines, but still machines. Whereas the Wild entries lean far more into the fantasy side of things, I suppose would be the right term, with the Zoids themselves being too much like animals and having their own characteristics and personalities, and I don't know, I just wasn't a fan. I've even seen a lot of people describe the first Zoids Wild as kind of like Pokemon's rendition of Zoids, and it really does feel like that a lot. Wild Zero improved upon this a little bit and was even directed by the same person who did Chaotic Century, but even then it still wasn't enough to keep my interest. So I can't help but think for me, it's the new direction they went with the Zoids themselves that I can't get behind. Or maybe they really just captured lightning in a bottle way back then and can't top it. The earlier series also really just tickled that gearhead in me. Seeing Bit work on the Zero in the hangar or in the changing armor system, or even Van and the gang working on the Blade Liger and Guardian Force, those little things made the Zoids feel a little bit more like machines and just grounded the series just that little bit more in reality. Those moments remind me of the times me and my mates would chill in the garage for a day or two doing mods on our car, you know, installing a obnoxious 3-inch catback or some coilovers and some wheels and checking out the fitment. That was just the kind of vibe I got. And honestly, I can say with confidence it was watching Zoids as a child that led me into liking cars in the first place. It's kind of cringe to say out loud, but driving a manual car is probably the closest thing any of us will ever get to piloting a mech. So that's kind of why I love it so much, and it is just so much fun. Obviously, you should always drive responsibly and follow your country or state's road laws, but still, driving's great, cars are great, and Zoids were great in that same kind of way. I mean, way back then, for the adverts for the Zoids toys, the slogan was literally build it, customize, mobilize. That's what you do. Work on them. You know, you get it. And I just think this familiarity I had with them has slowly faded away as the series went on and changed. With each iteration, it's like it was asking me to further suspend my disbelief until it got to a point where it was no longer relatable or cool anymore. Yeah, I know I am talking about suspending my disbelief in regards to a cartoon made for children, which did also feature ancient Zoidian magic way back when, but I hope I made a bit of sense here and didn't completely lose you. So yeah, sorry if you were really hoping for me to get into the nitty gritty of Wild and Wild Zero, but I'm not gonna put myself through finishing either of those series, at least not anytime soon. Maybe sometime in the next 4 years. I hope you all enjoyed this little 4th anniversary video. It was a fantastic trip down memory lane to see how far I've come in these 4 years and how much these videos have changed. I mean, I think I've gotten a little bit better. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe to keep a smile on my face so I do not go back to talking like this guy, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you thought. Thanks so much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Peace.